Hello, I am Brian Thompson with the UBC Students for Freedom of Expression, and today we are interviewing Tabitha Ewert. So let us know, who are you, what do you do?
Yeah, my name is Tabitha Ewert. I am legal counsel for We Need a Law. We Need a Law is a campaign that seeks to mobilize Canadians to advocate for legislation that protects preborn children. So the basic, premise is Canada has no abortion law. We're the only democratic country in the world with no abortion law, and so we're seeking to bring in protections for preborn children, at least at some stage during pregnancy.
I see. So you're with your campaign, We Need a Law. And on October 11, 2018, you placed 50,000 pink flags at the Holland Park in Surrey. Mm-hmm. So why this day? What message were you trying to convey with this display?
Yeah, so the flag displays are something we've done for, I think we did the first one in 2015. And the flag displays are really to plant flags to remember the victims of abortion, the victims being the preborn children who lose their lives to abortion. So we've done 100,000 flag displays, and that's one for every abortion that happens in Canada every year. So it's estimated that there's about 100,000 abortions every year. That specific flag display that you're referencing was on October 11th, which is the International Day of the Girl. And that's an international day to recognize that there is sex-based violence that happens in this world and to try and address the inequalities that especially young women face. And so we wanted to do the 50,000 pink flags to recognize the 50,000 preborn children who are actually female or women who lose their lives to abortion, and specifically to recognize that actually abortion disproportionately targets women. Sex selection abortion is a real thing that happens. There are certain there's certain times when people will actually choose to have an abortion based on the gender of the preborn child, and so we really wanted to shine a light on that it's not okay. It's gender discrimination is a problem, and it's a problem with abortion as well.
I see. Well, today I often hear that abortion is a dying issue. So it seems that if you put articles on the internet and you put millennials abortion, and they say that millennials have accepted abortion whereas other generations have not. So have we accepted abortion as an acceptable form of, healthcare? That is also a charter right. So how does your organization deal with those claims?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the opinion polls in Canada, the majority of Canadians actually support some restrictions on abortion, specifically late-term abortion. There's, I think, some numbers that in the 70% people think that late-term abortion, that is abortion in the third trimester, should be illegal. If you ask Canadians about the issue of sex selection abortion, 98% of Canadians in a 2019 poll said they thought that sex selection was an impermissible reason to have an abortion. Mm-hmm. So it's not a dead issue. There are tons of conversations happening across Canada and, of course, around the world on this issue. Even just look at the 2019 election and the amount of times that the different party leaders had to address the issue of abortion. That's because lots of people are asking these questions. I mean, again, like I said, Canada is the only democratic country with no abortion law. We are very extreme. If you look at European countries, the vast majority of them actually ban it after the first trimester, so after 12 weeks. That's normal in the Western European country, and yet here in Canada it's legal all 40 weeks of pregnancy. So I definitely think that it's not a dying issue at all. In terms of the charter right thing that you mentioned, just to briefly touch on that, because there's a lot of misconception around that. That generally comes from the 1988 Morgentaler decision from the Supreme Court. And it's very important to understand that Supreme Court decision did not find a right to abortion at all. They didn't even really address the issue of whether there was a woman's right. It had to do with the specific law that we had previously. They found that law was arbitrary and unfair. And so they said, look, you've got to strike down that law. But they actually said they fully expected Parliament to pass a new law. And it's actually been the inaction of Parliament that has left us with no abortion law, not any charter right or any decision from the Supreme Court.
I see. So let me ask you a question. This was an event that happened 2017 in October. And there was an organization called the Canadian Centre for Bioethics Reform. And they placed big boards with the pictures of aborted fetuses. And there's a person there who mentioned that, hey, I am all for freedom of expression, but this is kind of gross, and this is not the way it should be done. So, I mean, we talked before, and you mentioned that these organizations are different. You're not with them, but can you explain what are your thoughts on that? Is that an acceptable way to conduct freedom of expression?
Yeah. It's really interesting because I think people get really caught up on this issue. This is a very emotional issue for a lot of people. I mean, there are 100,000 abortions every year. That's 100,000 women who have had abortions every year. That's 100,000 fathers who may or may not know about the abortion, but, was involved. So it's an issue that touches us very personally. We often get very emotional. So I find it often when we talk about the abortion victim photography, that is showing the victims of abortion, it's useful to take yourself outside of that issue and put yourself like in a different social reform movement. So the civil rights movement in the United States, there was a young boy who ended up being brutally lynched because he was African American and he was accused of whistling at a white woman. It wasn't actually true, but because of this, he was brutally lynched. And his mother actually made sure that they had an open casket funeral. And she brought all the media in and said, look, this is what they did to my son. And pictures of him were spread far and wide because they wanted to show people, the victims, of why they were acting, why they needed reform, why the civil rights movement had the momentum and the motivation that they did. And so things like that. Same thing with with slavery and the abolition movement in the UK. One of the most provocative things that they did was they showed a diagram that showed how the slaves were being transferred from Africa to the different places, and it shocked people. People had fainted at the sight of it. Like, it was so graphic in their ideas. It's not graphic by modern standpoints, but just in the time period it was. And again, they're showing the reasons for why they're acting on this, why they're doing it. So if you understand that abortion is a human rights violation, right? That's why the pro-life movement exists, is because we believe that every human being has human rights. And we believe that every human being, from the moment that they come into existence at fertilization, is a unique, distinct human being that deserves the right to life, and abortion takes that right away. And so we need to be able to show the victims, to show why this movement is happening. It's not happening in an abstract, hypothetical world. It's happening with real victims, and that's why we show the victims of it. So in terms of abortion victim photography, it's not something that my specific organization does, but it is something I support.
I see. Well, there is a view that is very common in university campuses, and it's quite thought-provoking. So I took this from a journal, the Journal for Medical Ethics, and there's this article written by someone called Udo Schaklenk and Ricardo Smalling, and the title is "Why Medical Professionals Have No Moral Claim to Conscientious Objection and Accommodation in Liberal Democracies." So just wanted you to read this quote, and I wanted to hear your thoughts on it, if I can find it. Here it is. Okay. So the quote is, "Medical professionals are not entitled to subvert the objective of the profession they voluntarily joined by prioritizing their private beliefs over the professional delivery of services to the public, especially when they are monopoly purveyors of such services." So it's basically saying, hey, abortion is something that is pertinent to the medical profession, and although you may be entitled to believe that certain things are wrong or right, you shouldn't impose your values on others. For example, the woman who wants to have an abortion. So what is your take on this quote?
Yeah, so this could start a very, very long discussion on a lot of different issues. So where to start? So let's start with what are doctors? What do we go to a doctor for? Okay. You go to a vending machine to plug in your quarters to choose, I want that bag of chips, and you get it out, right? That's what you go to a vending machine is. when you go to a doctor, that's not what you're going for. You're not going because you're saying I want A, B, C procedures, and then he just does them for you. That's not why you go to a doctor. You go to a doctor to get their professional judgment on what is the best for your health, right? So, I might go to a doctor and the doctor might tell me, you know what, you need to exercise more. Okay, maybe I don't want to hear that, but that's their professional best judgment, and so it's in my best interest that even though I don't want to hear that, that is what they tell me. That's what doctors are supposed to do, and we affirm this in so many areas of what a doctor does. If someone goes to their physician and say, "Look, I want prescription pain medication," the doctor, she's going to look at them, see whether they actually need it, and if they don't need it, she's going to say no, because that's in the best interest of that patient. Same thing with things like certain plastic surgeries. Certain physicians are going to be like, no, we don't perform that because we don't think it's in your best interest. So why does that way of looking at a physician suddenly end when it only comes to a very few social issues like abortion and assisted suicide? Both of which a pro-life physician isn't refusing to perform an abortion because she thinks, oh yeah, it might be in my patient's best interest, I just don't want to do it. That's not why a pro-life physician refuses to perform an abortion. A pro-life physician refuses to perform an abortion because she does not believe it's in the patient's best interest to end the life of her child. That's why she's not doing it. Same thing with something like assisted suicide. A physician isn't just, oh, I don't want to do it. They think it's not in the best interest of their patient to end that patient's life. That's why they're doing it. So why should that just go out the window on these specific issues when we allow physicians to act in their professional judgment on everything else? So it comes down to just a fundamental misunderstanding of what a physician's role is.
Right. Thank you. And I wanted to ask you about the campaign, We Need a Law, and what kind of law are you looking for? And what kind of law are you looking for? Can you explain?
Yeah.
What are you doing?
Yeah, so We Need a Law is sort of, so we have, it comes with the fundamental basics of every human being is entitled to human rights. So we want to see that enshrined in our law. But we also come from a perspective of we're in a democracy. We want to work with what the majority of Canadians believe, working towards a direction where we'll get that to happen. So we're what we call an incrementalist group, which is, okay, majority of Canadians do not agree with me that, every preborn child deserves the human right to life. Not everyone agrees with me, but the majority of Canadians actually do support some restrictions on abortion, whether that be something like late-term abortion, whether that be something like sex selection abortion. So specifically, one of our main initiatives is something we call the International Standards Law, which, as I mentioned earlier, Canada is the only democratic country with no abortion law. So it just says, well, let's look at what other countries have and see if we can't bring Canada at least in line with our international counterparts. And what you look around the world, what you generally see are three components to an abortion law: a gestational limit, a counseling requirement, and a waiting period. So the gestational limit is to recognize that, we need to start protecting human rights at some point during the pregnancy. We chose 13 weeks. It's very similar to what a lot of Western European countries have. And then the waiting period and the counseling requirement, they're really about the woman. And they're really about, should a woman be left alone making this decision? Like, what are the situations that brought her to the point where she wants to have an abortion? And can we make sure we're also addressing those situations and not just, giving her the abortion and then walking away from her?
Well, you mentioned women, and access to abortion is said to be, pro-women, as in pro-choice. And, I believe that maybe if you have a new law, for example, hypothetically, wouldn't it have, consequences that some people would not like to bear? For example, there's a woman who has been raped, and girls who have been sexually abused, like minors, for example, and women who cannot raise children, because they have a low socioeconomic position, and simply those who do not want to have a child. So is this still not imposing your beliefs on others? And how do you explain that? How do you venture through that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just to go over the last point first, every law imposes your opinions on someone else. I mean, a law against, sexual encounters with minors, that's imposing a belief that it is harmful to children, for that to happen. So we want to, as a society, condemn that outright. So when it comes to abortion, again, it's a human rights violation. It's taking the right to life away from a preborn child. So yes, that is a moral standpoint, but it's one that I think the majority of people actually can get behind. In terms of the women aspect, I mean, I find that one really fascinating because the pro-choice side has really co-opted, women. We're for women, they say. But they never really justify why. And like we even had the Golden Globes were this past weekend, and Michelle Williams, pregnant actress Michelle Williams got up and talked about her previous abortion and credited, the fact that she was able to choose abortion as to why she's able to succeed in her career. And I find that just an appalling way to view women's empowerment. Why are women only allowed or only able to succeed at the expense of their lives of their children? That to me is not a good way to view women. It's not an empowering way to view women to say, in order to succeed in life, you cannot be a mother. In order to succeed in life, you must be able to end the life of your preborn child. And so I actually think it's way more empowering to say to women, you actually can be a mother and be an actress. You actually can be a mother and be a doctor. We have so many options in the modern world. We don't need to not have children in order to succeed in life. And so I think that's a really important thing to remember. It's not, the issue isn't women versus children. It's women and children. And how do we as a society, instead of constantly telling women, you need to get rid of your children in order to succeed, how do we come up with solutions that help both women and children? And so you mentioned some horrible circumstances, things like sexual assault or maybe even financial need. So rather than saying the solution to that is abortion, why can't we find solutions that help both? Whether that be that, there's lots of programs out there to provide support for single mothers. There's adoption programs if a woman really is unable to care for her child. Why can't we find solutions that don't end the life of one of the parties?
Thank you. And is we need a law, the campaign, merely just a conservative campaign? Let me explain. So is it mostly, Christians who are pro-lifers, anti-abortion, and they want to put these issues in government, or is this also a liberal issue left? What is we need a law about?
Yeah. So we need a law as nonpartisan. We're happy to work with whoever wants to work with us. Anybody who wants to work at protecting preborn children, we're there to go alongside them. The current political landscape federally is as such that both the Liberal and the NDP and now the Green Party, and I'm unsure where the bloc falls on this, have all said that if you're pro-life, you cannot even be in our party. So they've really taken this totalitarian perspective on the issue, which is unfortunate. I'm very optimistic that that can change and that there will come a time when we will be working with people from all the parties. And it comes down to, I really don't think that this should be just a one political strand issue, because this is a human rights issue. And when you go to a pro-life event, when you look around the room, you'll find people of all ages, you'll find both men and women, you'll find people from different ethnicities, you'll find people from various political parties. And that's because it's not a one segment issue, it's a human rights issue. And as long as you are for human rights, you can be pro-life. And the movement's very diverse in that respect.
So, give me your thoughts about the recent UFA decision for freedom of expression.
Yeah, so the Court of Appeal in Alberta just recently put out a decision where the University of Alberta Pro-Life Club was charged $17,500 of security fees just to host a student event. And it was because they'd had a previous event that had some issues with protesters, and so the university says to even have the event this time, we need to have security up front, and they asked the Pro-Life Club to completely cover the costs of the club. So there's lots of technical things in the decision. Some of them are very interesting from a legal perspective. I won't get into all that. But just on the overall issue, the judge says, look, it's unreasonable to say this is all the pro-life club's fault. It's unreasonable to expect them to pay the total cost. One of the things they said is, like, you had protesters there. They were part of it. The pro-life people shouldn't have to pay just because there were other people who didn't like what was going on. They also called out the university for being, able to handle sporting events and parties and things like that, but suddenly not when it comes to this issue. They were not able to be flexible. And the judge said, look, this you guys do this all the time. You're able to handle what's happening here. So it'll be very interesting to see how this gets applied to other obviously, free speech on campus is a huge issue right now. I expect to see more on it, and I'm really interested to see how this decision will play into that.
Now, for the last question, and this has to do with freedom of expression. So, let us suppose that Canada is has a pro-life position. It's against abortion. And there's, let's say, an activist who is an advocate of abortion. Let's say that this state is, it's totalitarian. It doesn't want opposing views. Would you support this pro-abortion advocate to first express her views and also seek to put in legislation that promotes abortion?
Yeah. I mean, we're in a democracy here in Canada. I think at its roots, Canada's system is really admirable because it says, look, you don't need to impose views just from the top. We can say, look, we can have people. I mean, Parliament, especially the Senate, was supposed to be a place where people argue about these ideas and argue about what's best for society and things like that. And because we can able to have that argument and then vote with our representatives, then they can come to decisions. And if the broader public doesn't like the decisions that the representatives like, then we can vote those people out of office and change that. So I think that's a great system. I'm very much in support of it. I'm in support of it now, even though we don't have pro-life laws, and I'd be in support of it if we did have pro-life laws.
Well, thank you very much, Tabitha, for your time, and keep tuned for the next interviews and subscribe.